As a quick introduction, he, his pre-architectural history, he studied comp lit and worked as a translator, which was news to me, as French and German, which I think explains some of how you go about thinking about, well, working textually in the first place, but also thinking internationally. Spent a long time living in the Bay Area and teaching at the CCA, as well as working at his own practice, Gaga, which specialized in temporary sort of pop-up or time-constrained structures, including an emergency shelter trade show booth, which is a...
Those were two different things.
I was hoping they were the same thing.
An emergency trade show booth must sell fast.
An emergency... There is such a thing, an emergency shelter trade show booth. I think that should be your next project. In any case, before being dragged to this side of the country 4 years ago to SUNY Buffalo, where he became, as he put it, an agent of the state, and part of the Center for Architecture and Situated Technologies. So that's Jordan, and I, in my role as director of Studio X, always get to ask really stupid questions so that everyone else doesn't have to, although you're welcome to. But my first stupid question is, what is a VLO? How will we know one when we see one?
Okay. Do you need me to?
It's for the video, so you...
All right, so I'll try this. Hello? This is probably off anyway. So it's on, okay. So, so a very large organization, hello everyone, thanks for coming, is a, it's a neologism. It's just a phrase that I've coined to try and name this thing that I think we are facing now, where we see large conglomerations, sometimes a mixture of corporations and governments, or individuals that come together, usually with the assistance of a pervasive computing technology, some kind of a use of a wireless network or a novel human-computer interaction, and has pronounced effects on the built environment, on architecture and landscape. And so one of the traits of very large organizations that Nicola is getting at is that I think that they are not recognizable as typologies are. They are recognizable by their traits. So it's an inductive process of defining what they are. Space programs are very large organizations. Precision agriculture is, but so is refugee policy, which doesn't, those are not a very obvious kind of family of things. But they all are marked by this kind of cooperation of many in a way that affects many more, in fact, than ever before. So that's a start.
So why did you choose the particular VLOs that are on the hall of VLOs here?
That's a good question. I'd say some of them were just by occasion or opportunity. So for instance, this project that I called Beaufleuve was really an outgrowth of, frankly, just regular volunteering that I was doing at a neighborhood center in our new home of Buffalo. The west side of Buffalo has been marked by waves of immigration for decades, and most recently a really dramatic change where it's a lot of Somali and Sudanese and Burmese immigrants. And so I was just volunteering in the neighborhood center and saw an opportunity to do something that was a kind of mixture of a workshop and a play structure and a website through which the kids there could start to go through some of the protocols of immigration that they had been kind of forced through in immigration in the airport, and to come to terms with or understand them, but also to learn what changing and invisible policies had permitted them to come, but maybe not their friend in Kenya. And there were lots of stories from kids there who were asking, why am I here and not my friend in Kenya? Things like that. So some projects came up like that. Hyperculture, which is this precision agriculture study, came out of a collaboration with my friend Virginia Sanfratello in San Francisco. And other things were just a kind of a curiosity that came up. So they're varied. Yeah.
And can you run through the very large organizations that are identified along these walls?
Sure. So running from one end of the wall, in no particular order to the others, there's a project that I call Phantom Toll Booth Plaza, which is riffing on the title of a children's book. And that regards international border crossings, in particular between the US and Canada, but the kinds of protocols and technologies that are affecting vast tracts of land on both of our north and south borders and many other countries' borders. The second project is Hyperculture. I think that's the second one. Which is about precision agriculture, and this is reinvestigating ways that GPS drives things like tractors through landscape to try and optimize the amount of land that we use, and also to optimize the amount of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, but as yet does not treat monoculture. It doesn't question the kind of proliferation of corn and soy production. So we're looking at ways that could be investigated, not just for a kind of ecological, but also a social change. And then the third project down is Emission, which was a result of an invitation to participate in an international arts festival in Normandy that was organized by a woman who's just entered, Alice Mallet. So that was 1 year of this festival that was devoted to questioning the legacies of modernism on the Normandy coast. And so this was a project that looked in its installation site in a modernist villa that was a doctor's home and praxis to look at ways that radiation have kind of ambivalent or ambiguous effects on the body, and that there's a kind of modernist legacy to that plays out even in our cell phones today. Many of you probably know, but radiation has a fraught and very prominent role in the landscape of France today because nuclear energy is so popular there. And then Beaufleuve, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, is really a kind of migratory structure itself about migration and refugeeism in Buffalo, but could be kind of operated in other places. That's a way that children can also kind of collect their stories within the structure and then use that to query their line on a map on the website it generates to learn about the immigration policy that let them come. And then the last is Day for Night, which is the last in the series, just by happenstance. It's actually the earliest of the projects. This was an inflatable structure that also is migratory. It was reinstalled this year in Buffalo. And it was commissioned by the city of San Jose as a temporary use of a vacant storefront downtown. And the inflatable hosts a set of live audio-video feeds that are set up with cities that are 12 time zones removed. So it's about kind of making visible and apparent and also giving an architectural space to the kinds of technological or financial or cultural relationships that cities build with one another now. So it sort of leaps from this old quote of Paul Virilio's that prophesied that 30 years ago.
Okay, 2 more quick questions. One is, these, literally massive sort of entities that you identify, or it's hard to even call them entities, they're so dispersed. They wouldn't necessarily occur to many people as a great place for an architect to work. An architect often, it's a plot of land, it's a site, it's very focused.
Client.
Exactly. So I'm just curious, what, as a designer or an architect, where's the opportunity with these VLOs? What is it that you see that is, you know, the role and the opportunity of the architect here?
Yeah, I think my motivation is really to identify these as a whole field of work, and none of these get into a whole lot of depth, but my intention in doing all of them is to kind of place points on a very broad field to identify a whole world of work that designers, architects, and other designers can enter, because in the case of something like precision agriculture or the Tollbooth Plaza, they're not involved, but it's clearly a kind of landscape and architectural concern. So I think that it calls on us to think a little opportunistically about identifying other opportunities, or that's redundant, but to identify the kinds of spaces that are emerging between these organizations and to advocate for a role in their process of change. So in the case of the Tollbooth Plaza, the Peace Bridge, for instance, in Buffalo, which is the border crossing to Canada, is now a site of a lot of contestation between our two countries, countries that are otherwise usually very harmonious. And land use rights and development rights are really falling under a lot of debate. And so the next phase of that project is planned to actually develop a design unsolicited to kind of publicize and raise questions about what kind of other things can be envisioned than just another, let's say, duty-free one-off station.
Right. Okay, and this final question goes out to the audience too, so it's participatory at this point. What if we had a slightly longer wall? Just say maybe just another, 6 feet of wall. What VLO would you like to have included, and can anyone here think of a VLO that is missing or that they would like to see Jordan tackle next? Or you. Yeah, why not? Any VLOs?
I'm actually curious if anyone has an organization they want to shout out, one that doesn't even exist maybe. While I try to think of one, one that doesn't exist yet. What I like most about the question is the idea that one doesn't exist.
Right. Future VLOs.
I mean, I think that for me, what's really most interesting is that they go across scales from the nanoscale up to the scale of satellite networks and subsea cables that surround the planet. And so when I try to imagine others to tackle or others that need to be invented, I'm actually thinking not for a location or a kind of theme, like, let's say, public health, but a kind of scale.
Well, I have one.
Yeah.
You can tell me whether it qualifies or not.
Yeah.
You get to be in charge here and be like, yes,
'cause I made up
no.
this term.
Exactly. What about the metric system? Is it VLO or no? It's like hot or not here for VLOs.
Well, I think if I were to wonder about that, I would start with the story, apocryphal or not, that the metric system should have been here were it not for Ronald Reagan. So it's during the Reagan presidency that the plans for wide implementation of the metric system were canceled. So I would want to look at what are the outcomes in architecture and landscape, either in the profession or in the kind of, I don't know, industry, building industry. That would be interesting. But
it's a political structure too. I mean,
and it comes back a little bit to questions of computation, because so much of our process of design now relies on metric thinking. So the question of units, I don't know. I'd have to give that some thought. I think that pervasive computing is an important element to any of these. Oh. So I'd have to think about that.
Maybe on the metric system. Do we have any other brave VLO inventors in the audience or identifiers? What about you, Jordan? Now you had at least 5 seconds to think. Yeah.
Well, space programs is actually where it began. So that's not something that's here. There are a few that I've been working on that aren't in this exhibition. And so I think that looking at things that have come back to Earth, like Biosphere 2, which is sort of a notorious flop in lots of ways, but has it's very bound up with the history of development for outer space. I think that there's something there to question about how we condition Earth environment and how we think about space in relationship to that. So Biosphere 2, for those of you who don't know it, was meant to replicate a kind of perfect enclosed environment socially and ecologically, and failed twice for different reasons. But
Although now they're using it to simulate climate change,
Right.
so it's
so that's an interesting.
yeah.
Another
They're deliberately raising the carbon dioxide.
Yeah. So another one involves plant species. The Harvard, there's a collection of glass flowers at Harvard University that's really incredible. And that was made about 130 years ago by a father and son team throughout an entire lifetime. And do you know it? No. Okay, that's one for you. So the glass flower collection is really amazing. And it's in one room of their anthropology museum. And what's been interesting is that in the last few years, the curators of the collection, which has been static for all these years, they realized that all of these plants, I didn't mention, but these were master craftsmen from Dresden. So they were a German father and son working for a patron in Massachusetts throughout their entire lives. And it was because it was at an age that we were exploring anatomy, but we couldn't put plants in formaldehyde. They'd decompose, so they'd make them in glass. Well, they very carefully maintain the glass flowers, but they're finding that there's a new value to them because there are all these flowers that are now going extinct. So they're starting to tag the flowers to identify flowers that are vanishing from the Massachusetts landscape. So I think that between that and our ability now to do things like remote sense through satellites and machine vision, different kinds of plant species, or the density of crops, I think it would be very interesting to see whether there's something there about how we catalog species. That's not metrics, but
I would like to see that one. We will save this.
Okay.
We will save a piece of wall for you.
flowers. We'll
Yeah.
be back with flowers.
Back with flowers. All right. I don't think we're going to do a formal Q&A because it's much more fun to just mug Jordan and ask him your question while we're here drinking wine. But thank you all for coming. Do
Thank you
feel
for
free
coming.
to ask much better questions than mine. I tried to anticipate the stupid ones so you don't have to. And yeah, thank you for coming. Thanks, Jordan.